Thanks for joining us on this video summary of the book Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortlund. Chapter 1, His Very Heart. What is the heart of Christ like? We're going to be reading some passages in the book Gentle and Lowly, and we're going to be answering some questions. Just remember, the idea behind this study is that you read the book, you read the chapter, and on Thursday nights, you can come to Art City Church at 6:30, and we're going to be discussing these as a group. I really believe that's how you're going to get get the most out of this study. But in this way, if you can't, what you can do, what we're going to be doing here is actually going through the questions that we would be going through on that Thursday night. Hopefully you have a copy of the book. If you don't, come see us, email us, message us on Facebook. We would be glad to help you have a copy of the book, get a copy of the book. And we're going to just walk through this chapter each week and talk about the things, answer some questions regarding the chapter that week. The passage that he's going to be talking about is Matthew 11:29. So if you haven't read the book, and if you wanted to turn there, you could turn to Matthew 11:29. He says in this book, in the first chapter, my dad pointed out to me something that Charles Spurgeon was a pastor in England in the 1800s. He said it's something that Charles Spurgeon pointed out to him. In the 4 gospel accounts given to us in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 89 chapters of biblical text, there's only one place where Jesus tells us about his own heart. We learn much in the 4 Gospels about Christ's teaching. We read of his birth, his ministry, and his disciples. We are told of his travels and prayer habits. We find lengthy speeches and repeated objections by his hearers, prompting further teaching. We learn of the way he understands himself to fulfill the whole Old Testament. And we learn in all 4 accounts of his unjust arrest, his shameful death, and astonishing resurrection. Consider the thousands of pages that have been written by theologians over the past 2,000 years on all of these things. But in only one place, perhaps the most wonderful words ever uttered by human lips, do we hear Jesus himself open up to us his very heart. This is what Matthew 11:29 says. Come unto me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Matthew 11:28 through 30. So Dane Ortlund says about that verse, in the one place in the Bible where the Son of God pulls back the veil and lets us peer way down into the core of who he is, we are not told that he is austere and demanding in heart. We are not told that he is exalted and dignified in heart. We are not even told that he is joyful and generous in heart. Letting Jesus set the terms, his surprising claim is that he is gentle and lowly in heart. And so one of the things the questions that we are looking at is, what role does the heart play in a person's life? And what are the implications of this for what Jesus says about his own heart? He references the answer to this on page 18 in the book. He says this, one thing to get straight right from the start is that when the Bible speaks of the heart, whether it's in the Old Testament or the New, it is not speaking of our emotional life only, but of the central, animating center of all we do. In other words, it is what gets us out of bed in the morning and what we daydream about as we drift off to sleep. It is our motivation headquarters. The heart, in biblical terms, is not part of who we are, but the center of who we are. Our heart is what defines and directs us. We're going to be talking about this in regards to Jesus, but one of the side notes and what we're going to be thinking about is, what is our heart? Do you see that in your life, that the heart is defined in the biblical terms as that one center in you that is what gets you up in the morning? It is what defines you. It's what directs you. It's what gives you purpose. We need to look at it that way. It is the center of our very being, and why we do what we do. It's because of our heart. And one of the things that we're praying through the study, as we study and look at the heart of Christ toward us, that it will change our heart. To understand who He is would change our heart to be more affectionate toward Him. And in regarding to the implications of this for what Jesus says about His own heart, we need to be thinking about the fact that if that's the definition of the heart, that it is what gets a person up. It's what makes that person do what he does. It's the impulse of that person. When it comes to Jesus, this is what Dane Ortlund says. It says, and when Jesus tells us what animates Him most deeply, what is most true of Him, when He exposes the innermost recesses of His being, what we find there is He is gentle and lowly. And he ends this section in the chapter by saying, who could ever have thought up such a Savior as that? The next question, and we're going to discuss in the chapter, is kind of defining in Matthew 11, what does it mean by gentle and lowly? If that is what Jesus says that His heart is like at the very impulse of His being, what does that mean? So He describes gentle by saying that this word that's translated gentle is used 3 other times in the New Testament. It's translated meek in Matthew 5:5, in Jesus' teaching on the Beatitudes. It is translated humble in Matthew 21:5, thinking or describing Jesus. And it is also translated again gentle in 1 Peter 3:4. So we look at these words, meek, humble, and gentle. And this is what Dane says about these things when he's describing Jesus' heart. I just want you to think about these. He says, Jesus is not trigger happy. He's not harsh. He's not reactionary. He's not easily exasperated. It means He just gets tired of us. He is not, He is the most understanding person in the universe. The posture most natural to Him is not a pointed finger, but open arms. And it's just a beautiful truth when we're describing who Jesus is and what He means to us. What is His posture to us? And we get that mixed up sometimes because we interpret our world and we interpret our own thoughts to describe who Jesus is. And we need to know from a biblical standpoint who Jesus is. And this is what He says about Himself in Matthew 11. He's gentle and lowly. The word lowly it overlaps with that of gentle, and together they communicate the single reality about Jesus' heart. And so he describes this, Dane Ortlund describes this, the word lowly as, and I love this, referring to the socially unimpressive, those who are not the life of the party, but rather cause the host to cringe when they show up. In other words, the word lowly here, when Christ is saying, my heart is gentle and lowly, what he says about this, Dane Ortlund says, the point is that Jesus is saying that He is accessible. For all of His resplendent glory, His dazzling holiness, His supreme uniqueness and otherness, no one in human history has ever been more approachable than Jesus Christ. No prerequisites, no hoops to jump through. He can be approached no matter who you are. Doesn't matter if you're that person that when you show up at the party, everybody else cringes because you showed up. That's okay. We're all really like that, and we think we're not. That's just our pride and our arrogance speaking. But Jesus doesn't care. Jesus is approachable. He wants us to come to it. And so one of the questions we ask and we're going to talk about is, okay, what difference does that make in our everyday life? That you know that no one in human history has ever been more approachable than Jesus Christ, and there is no prerequisite. Matter of fact, I love how Dane Ortlund says it. He says the minimum bar to be enfolded into the embrace of Jesus is simply to open yourself up to Him. It is all He needs. He is longing and wanting us to just open up to Him and be real, be true, open up our hearts to Him. And He would be there, no matter what our heart is like, to receive us. And because He does that because His very pulse is gentle and lowly. He goes on to say that, what did Jesus say when we do that? He said there's no payment required. That He said, I will give you rest. His rest is a gift, not a transaction. And I love what He says here, because He says, whether you are actively working hard to crowbar your life into smoothness, Jesus said in Matthew 11, all those who labor. So that's a definition of laboring in that verse, that we're actively working hard. Man, we're just so working to make our life smooth. You're laboring. Well, Jesus said, if you're like that, maybe that's what you're doing. You can come unto me, because I'm gentle and lowly. Take my yoke upon you, and I'll give you rest. Or He said, maybe you're passively finding yourself weighed down by something outside of your control. So you're heavy laden. Maybe it's your kids. Maybe it's the burden of taking care of them, or being a caregiver in another way, or the job that you're working, the boss person you're working for. Maybe it's just the demands of life to pay the bills and to make things work, or whatever it is. You find yourself, maybe it's an illness that you didn't ask for, that has come upon you. You're heavy laden. Jesus Christ desires that you find rest, that you come out of the storm, and that you find rest in Him. He goes on to say here that gentle and lowly, this according to His own testimony is Christ's very heart. This is who He is: tender, open, welcoming, accommodating, understanding, willing. If we are asked to say only one thing about who Jesus is, we would be honoring Jesus' own teaching if our answer is gentle and lowly. I love what he says here. He says if Jesus hosted His own personal website, maybe He would have His own social network. He'd have His own Facebook page, His own Twitter page, His Instagram. He said the most prominent line of the About Me drop-down would read, gentle and lowly in heart. I love how Dane mentions that this is not for everyone. It's not a promise to every person that Jesus is gentle and lowly. It is for those who come to Him, to take His yoke upon them, who cry to Him for help. Again, He welcomes any and everybody to come. The problem is we don't come. The problem is we hold everything in. The problem is we're impenitent. He says gentle and lowly does not mean mushy and frothy, but for the penitent, His heart of gentle embrace is never outmatched by our own sins and our insecurities, our doubts and anxieties, our failures. See, we're going to fail. We're going to be insecure. We're going to doubt. We're going to sin. We're going to do these things. But we ought to come to Him and open our heart to Him and confess those things. And He is there welcoming it no matter how bad we are. The worst thing to do is just to keep it all in and to be prideful and impenitent. When it comes to penitence, Christ, if we are prideful and we walk pridefully and we say, I've got it all under control and I can do whatever I need to do because it's all about me and I don't need anybody and I don't need Christ, that's the worst place to be, and we will not make it. That will not be bringing God's mercy and His gentleness and His lowliness. But if we are penitent and we humble ourselves and we say, no, I need Him. I'm broken. I'm sinful. I am a failure. That's what Christ wants, and He's waiting for that. His heart is waiting for that. And he brings to us, when we come to him that way, rest to our souls. He goes on to say on page 21 that for lowly gentleness is not one way Jesus occasionally acts toward others. Gentleness is who he is. This is why we're doing this study. This is his heart. He can't ungentle himself toward his own any more than you or I can change our eye color. It is who we are. And who Jesus is gentle and lowly at heart toward those that come unto him. And the promise that he gives us is rest for our souls. Not necessarily rest for our bodies. The Christian life is a hard life, and Christ never said it was going to be easy, but he did say he would be there with us, and he said that he would give us rest for our souls. He goes on to talk about the yoke. Jesus says that the yoke is easy, and we need to know that doesn't mean, again, that life is free of pain or hardship. We need to understand what that means. So he describes what yoke is. He says, consider what Jesus is saying. A yoke is a heavy crossbar laid on oxen to force them to drag farming equipment through the field. Jesus is using a kind of irony, saying that the yoke laid on his disciples, those that come to him, is a non-yoke, for it is a yoke of kindness. Who could resist this? And he gives a couple of examples. I want you to think about these examples. He says, it's like telling a drowning man that he must put on the burden of a life preserver, only to hear him shout back, sputtering, "No way, not me. This is hard enough drowning here in these stormy waters. The last thing I need is the added burden of a life preserver around my body." That's what we are like, confessing Christ with our lips, but generally avoiding deep fellowship with him out of a muted understanding of his heart. His yoke is kind, his burden is light. That is, his yoke is a non-yoke, and his burden is a non-burden. He never tires of sweeping us into his tender embrace. It is his very heart. It is what gets him out of bed in the morning. It's what he lives for. I love that. Maybe you feel like you're drowning, and the last thing you need is something else. But that something else is the thing that's going to keep you afloat. It is Jesus, and it is who he is, and it's studying who he is, and it's going to him, knowing that he's there, and it's treating him like he's a real person. I think sometimes we don't see him, so we think he's not real. He is, and he wants to hear from you. He wants you to trust him. And he's also given us the church, other people, to do life together. And one of the things that we want to come out of this study is that as we are doing this thing and we're opening up our hearts, knowing that he's there and he's there to welcome us and to accept us, that we ought to be accepting to each other, those that confess and are opening up too, and to be real with each other. And I'm hoping that that's going to be an application that comes out of this study also. One of the last questions is regarding the Puritan Thomas Goodman. According to Thomas Goodman, what misconception is Jesus correcting when he describes himself as gentle and lowly? And how do you find yourself falling prey to that misconception in your own thinking? One of the things that he talked about, and he quoted Thomas Goodwin on the Puritan, was this idea that we think that Jesus comes to us, but we think he comes to us and he holds his nose. Like this is the risen Christ, after all, and he's the one that's highly exalted, and one day every knee shall bow to him. And we think because of that, that when he comes to us, it's like, okay, I'll come to you, but I'm going to hold my nose because I don't really want to be around you, but I guess you need some mercy and you need some grace. And he talks about how that is not, this just really just smacks that in the face. That is not the way Jesus is. We allow culture in our society to define who Jesus is, and it's not. Jesus comes to us. He goes on to say that what Goodwin was trying to say is that this high and holy Christ does not cringe at reaching out and touching dirty sinners and numbed sufferers. Such embrace is precisely what he loves to do. He cannot bear to hold back. I think, I love this illustration. He goes, we naturally think of Jesus touching us the way a little boy reaches out to touch a slug for the first time. Face is screwed up, cautiously extending an arm, giving a yelp of disgust upon contact, and instantly withdrawing. We picture the risen Christ approaching us with that severe and sour disposition. But we need to read our Bibles. We need to understand that that's not the way Jesus is, and that the revealed Scripture tells us that he is perfect. He's perfect in his gentleness. He's perfect in his heart toward sinners, and that's what he wants to do for us. Have you found rest in Christ? Thanks for joining us in this first chapter of the book, Gentle and Lowly. If you have any questions or would love to reach out to us, you can do that through email, info@artcity.church, or through our Facebook page. And we'll look forward to looking at chapter 2 next week. God bless.